Hi everyone. We'll give it a couple more minutes so folks can come in. Give it about a minute or two. Okay, I think we could start rolling. Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us for the WISCAP CSBG Organizational Standards Training with Terry Bearden and Mary Beth. Terry is the project director at Community Action Partnership, and Mary Beth is the director of organizational capacity building. My name is Sabrina Heighton, and I am the Training and Communications Specialist at WISCAP. NCAP will leverage its deep knowledge of the CSBG organizational standards to design and deliver custom training that meets the needs of Wisconsin Community Action Network and enhances participants' understanding of key organizational standards, concepts, and practices. NCAP will work with WISCAP to identify priority organizational standards and topics, ensuring the training is focused and responsive to network needs. Now, a little more information about our speakers. Terry is responsible for support of the partnership's organizational capacity building efforts, including leading, implementing, and evaluating training and technical assistance strategies. Mary Beth is a public nonprofit administrator dedicated to building strong policies that help people use services, reach their goals, and increase significant report outcomes. Before I turn it over to Terry and Mary Beth, I want to pass along some housekeeping notes. Please be courteous to all attendees and remain on mute during the presentation. We recommend using the speaker view during the presentation. If you have a question, please utilize the chat function. I will monitor those throughout the presentation and address them as time allows during natural breaks during our time together. Following the presentation, you will receive a follow-up email with links to access the presentation materials and a survey link for you to leave any comments about this session. At this point, I would like to pass it along to Terry and Mary Beth.
Thank you, Sabrina. Set the bar high, but I think we can meet that bar. So thank you all for joining us. We always like to ground ourselves at the beginning of any engagement with our members in the promise of community action. So let's take a moment to do that now. Here we go. Promise of community action is community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And we really just want to encourage you to really live that promise and lean into that promise, especially during times such as this. So I see that we've started to have some comments in the chat, but I really want to encourage you guys to say hi. If you would put in the chat your name, agency, your role, and then what is the first thought you have when somebody says CSBG organizational standards? And if somebody wants to come off mute and just toss a word or two out there, we'd be glad to hear it. So what is your first thought when you hear CSBG organizational standards? Speechless. Okay, I can understand that. I can. Integrity, good. Okay. All right, I'm seeing some names. We're getting folks to share with us a little bit. I see a question, Sabrina, about the AI. I was not sure what your policy is on that, so I will defer to you on that. All right, so continue if you would to pop your ideas and your names into the chat. Let's take a look at what we're going to talk about during our time together today. And then we will take a look at the agenda for tomorrow when we come back together then. So for today, we're going to start with an overview of the CSBG organizational standards, kind of the history and what they are and why they are important to our network. We're going to talk about this moment, community action in this moment, and then really take a look at some specific standards that we think are important to lift up at this time in terms of board governance, financial operations and oversight, and organizational risk assessment. And of course, we'll have some time available at the end for some questions and answers. So I'm going to take one more look before I turn things over to Mary Beth and see if we have anything in the chat. Yeah, it looks like we're pretty speechless with the organizational standards. That could be good, could be bad. Let's see. Let's go forward with our overview, and I'm going to turn things over to Mary Beth to get us started there.
Thank you, Terry. Good afternoon, everyone. Really excited to be with you all to talk about CSBG organizational standards. Couple of things I want to say before I dive in. This training is meant to be participatory. It is a lot more fun for both of us, for us and for you, if we have your voice included, because Terry and I are awesome, but you'll get really sick of hearing from us if you listen to us for 6 hours in the next 2 days. So we're going to have points where we're going to ask you for your input. There's a no wrong door here. You can put it in the chat. You can come off of mute. We really welcome your voice into the space. If we were live in a room together right now, I'd ask folks who are responsible for the CSBG organizational standards to within their organization to put up their hands. I wonder though, we do have some functionality here in Zoom. Could someone, if you are responsible for the CSBG organizational standards in your agency, go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen and you should see a react. You can give me any reaction you want to show me that you're responsible for the CSBG organizational standards in your agency. So go ahead and, yep, I knew someone was going to do that face, Anna, and I love this. Like, you are my people. Okay, I see a couple of thumbs up going on and some shocked faces, and that is perfect. Uh, Friends, if you've never done the org standards before, if you're like, my boss told me to be here, I don't know a whole lot about them, that's okay too. We're going to hopefully by the end of this have you ready and prepared to take on the org standards. And we really hope we're going to lower your blood pressure a little bit about them. And hey, Terry and I are going to try to make this fun, okay? We really want you to have a good time talking about the org standards. So, okay. I'm going to dive in here to give you a little bit of an overview and just a touch of history about the CSBG organizational standards. So here is our national theory of change. And if you've never seen our national theory of change before, it's really important to remember that we have a network of 1,000 community action agencies coast to coast, serving 99% of America's counties that develop and deploy unique programs and services to be responsive to local needs, right? So we always say when you've seen one community action agency, you've seen one community action agency, right? And so you could think that we look totally different. And while we look different, guys, there are some commonalities in the way that we do our work. And what this theory of change does is it articulates those big goals that we work towards, the principles that we use to guide our services and strategies that we hope ultimately lead to the success of those big goals. And across the top, you see our three big goals. Individuals and families with low incomes are stable and achieve economic security. Communities where people with low incomes live are healthy and offer economic opportunity. And people with low incomes are engaged and active in building opportunities in communities. So I've been in a lot of rooms. I've never heard somebody say, hey, I'm a community action agency and I don't work in some way on at least one of those goals, right? So even though we all look different, we all work towards at least one of those goals. Some of us work towards all three of them. Um, we have those core principles that guide our work to achieve that. We recognize that poverty is complex. We really believe in building those local solutions. We seek to support family stability because we know that that's needed for economic security. We advocate for systemic change. I'm not going to read all of those to you, but those core principles then show up in the services and strategies that we deploy. We don't do just one thing in community action, right? We do employment, we do education, we do housing, we do health. I mean, it looks totally different, but at the end of the day, we all work towards those three big goals. So, friends, you're sitting there and saying, Mary Beth, you missed a whole section of the theory of change. And I promise you, I did not. Here's one of the really interesting things about community action is that we care about the entire community and we care about not just the difference that the network makes, right? We definitely do care about the outcomes that we achieve. We measure those robust results through our national performance indicators, which we report in the CSBG, the Community Services Block Grant Annual Report, on a regular basis, everybody's favorite term. Perhaps only, second to the org standards probably, but we care about the difference we make, but we also care about how well we do that, right? We want to be efficient, effective organizations that deliver robust results. So we have some um, thresholds that we want to make sure that all community action agencies achieve, right? In order to be a part of this really incredible network. And the way that we define that is through our CSBG organizational standards. And that's really where the org standards come in. So a way to think of them is that they ensure that all community action agencies have the minimum needed capacity to operate as a community action agency. I'm going to say more on that in just a minute. So on the next slide, just to give you a brief overview, the CSBG organizational standards were put into place under the Community Services Block Grant Information Memorandum. That's what IM stands for, 138. If you're unfamiliar with CSBG IMs, they are basically the way that our federal funder communicates to us about how they interpret and understand the rules and the law of the Community Services Block Grant, our core funding stream, right? More on that in just a second. When you look at the CSBG organizational standards, they are organized into kind of three thematic groups, and there are 9 total categories altogether. And you can see those 9 categories here in front of you. I'm not going to read them all to you. We're not going to go through every one of these standards because there's 58 of them, and we want you to still like us at the end of this. So on the next slide, here's a few things I want you to know about these 58 standards. First and foremost, they were designed by the Community Action Network for the Community Action Network. This was not some set of standards that was created by some bureaucrat in Washington telling us what we had to be or who we had to be. The process of building the organizational standards was very participatory. There were many rounds of conversations across the network about what is the minimum needed capacity or what capacity should a community action agency have, right? And so that's how we got to the standards that you see before you. Terry, it was probably, what would you say, a 3 or 4 year process for us to develop the CSBG organizational standards before they were ultimately implemented in 2016. Yeah. So those organizational standards also didn't come out of thin air. It wasn't just a whole bunch of people guessing at what we thought was needed. Some of the CSBG organizational standards tie directly to requirements from our core funding, the federal law that outlines our core funding, which is the CSBG Act. So there's that, but there's also, some OMB guidance that you see show up in our organizational standards. We're going to talk about some of that today. There's some other federal laws and regulation, right? Because we have to be sure that we're complying with some of these baseline legal things for us in order to be able to be effective agencies, right? But it doesn't stop there because just being compliant with the law isn't enough, right? There are some really important best practices when it comes to, management or our values that we have also baked into the organizational standard. So when you're looking at a standard, it's really good to think about what is the source of this standard? Is this a best practice or is this something that's legal, right? Does it come from a legal requirement that we have? Because that really has some implications for us. So here's the other thing to know about the org standards is that, as I said on the prior slide, they were implemented via a CSBG information memorandum, a CSBG IM. If you go to the CSBG Act itself and you go looking to see, well, where does it say I have to do org standards? It doesn't. And one of the reasons it doesn't is because the CSBG Act was last reauthorized in 1998. The org standards came in 2016. So there's been no updates to the federal law since 1998. So when you're looking to see like where's the requirement for the CSBG org standards, they actually come from that CSBG IM that Terry also put the link in the chat. So FYI, when your boss sends you on that wild goose chase, you'll know exactly where to go. Okay, on the next slide, some more things for you to know about the organizational standards. So CSBG is, I think this is actually on the next slide, but let me say this here. CSBG is a block grant. Community Services Block Grant is a block grant, which means that the feds set out general rules for and set the law and the policy, and then they grant the funding to the state, and then the state is it's the state who does the monitoring of requirements. They kind of set some of their own rules and regulations within the parameters that they've been given at the federal level. But my point to you here is there's a lot of authority that is put at the state level, even though the money comes from the feds. So in the case of the organizational standards, the states are the ones, your state office is the one who is responsible for monitoring you and for determining if standards are met or not met. Here's another thing is that when the states come out and they monitor you to see, if standards are met or unmet, there is no partial credit. There's no, well, you kind of did it, so yeah, there's a maybe. It is really only met or unmet. Some of the standards that we're going to look at, guys, you're going to see have multiple requirements. And for your state to be able to say that you have met a particular standard, you're going to have to meet all of those requirements, right? So just important to know, it's your state who makes this determination. I don't, I guess I should flag here that there are differences between public CAAs, the CAAs who are units of local government versus CAAs who are private nonprofits that have a typical governing board. So know that there is that difference. Is anybody on from a public CAA today? Or Sabrina, do you see anyone on from a public CAA with us? It does help us to know because there are differences. Here's my point. There's no additional requirements for a public CAA. Just the way that the standards are interpreted and applied look a little bit different for a public CAA. So if you are a public CAA and you want to go deeper on any of the standards we touch on in our time together, please give us a shout. We're happy to go deeper there. And then the other thing that you will notice when you look at the standards, and this can be one of those like amazing and frustrating things, is that the standards are pretty broad. A lot of times they tell you that you have to do a thing, but they don't tell you how you have to do a thing. But the idea is that again, with 1,000 different agencies, uh, you know, we really wanted the flexibility to give each state and local CAA the opportunity to meet that standard in the way that makes sense for them, right? That idea of local control really shows up even in the CSBG organizational standards. And so the standards themselves, in a lot of cases, are not going to tell you what's specifically required for the documentation. How do you have to accomplish this? It's not there in the federal set of standards. My last kind of controversial point, if you will, is that The CSBG organizational standards assess if you do a practice, but they don't assess kind of the quality of that practice. And that can sound a little odd, but hear me out. There's a standard that says you have to do a risk assessment, right? Could you theoretically do a risk assessment and meet the standard that isn't the highest quality risk assessment? I think it's possible, right? Could you be giving your board regular finance reports at every board meeting and meet the standard? You probably could, but does that mean that those reports are, the highest quality? No, that's not really the intent of the organizational standards. It's about ensuring that you have that baseline capacity needed. I don't say that to discourage that you shouldn't be assessing how can we do this to the best of our ability. Really, the org standards cue you in on some really important practices that you should be focusing on and wanting to make sure that they are as high performing as possible. But don't think that just because you're fulfilling the organizational standards that you're in good shape as an organization, right? Don't mistake those two concepts, or don't mix those two concepts up. So, okay. On the next slide then, and guys, if anyone has any thoughts, comments, reflections, anything you want to say, please feel free to throw in here. So the other thing to know, I started to talk about this on the last slide, is that these are national standards, but it's state administered, right? The feds give the money to the state then puts their own rules and their own interpretations into place for their specific state. So states are the ones who are responsible for providing you guidance about how they interpret the org standards, their requirements for meeting the org standards, and then assessing your compliance with the organizational standards. So if you have friends across state lines and you're talking to them about how do you meet this org standard, know that different states might interpret things a little bit differently. So really the best place when you have a question about an organizational standard, what's required to meet it, how it's interpreted, your best call to make is to your CSBG state office, 100% your CSBG state office. And also, the way that states assess compliance with the organizational standards looks very different. The feds do not prescribe how that has to look. In some states, the state comes out and does a desk monitoring or does a monitoring with you on site. Some states, you submit all of the documentation in your, database. In some states, they collect it via some other way, right? So you have to get familiar with your state specific way of assessing org standards. So on that note, I wonder if anyone on the call or any of our state friends on the call might be willing to just say a word about how you all assess the standards. Like, is that done on site? Is that done by uploading documentation? How is that done in Wisconsin? Oh, I see someone from Minnesota is here. So wonderful. It's uploaded through a portal. So that's helpful to know, right? And it usually involves a sampling. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, that's helpful. How about anyone from Wisconsin? How do you do your monitoring of the standards here? Someone could be typing that in, or we can also come back to this question because I want to make sure that folks know and understand their process. Oh, I see, Colleen, you said uploaded in a portal, but on-site monitoring every few years. That makes a lot of sense. An important note about the org standards too, your state is required to monitor you annually on org standards compliance. That's not your state being mean or extra. That really is your state doing what they're supposed to do. But your contract monitoring that you do is supposed to be at least once every, 3 years, at least on site at least once every 3 years. So flagging that for you there. So thank you, Colleen, for putting that in the chat for us. So, okay, let's go to the next slide. And this slide I call the lower your blood pressure slide. Okay, so of course, you should strive to meet 100% of the organizational standards. You should always be striving to meet 100% of your requirements. And I want to recognize that life happens, right? There are times that you're going to miss a standard. And here's the thing I want you to know. Usually, missing one standard, so long as it's not tied to a legal requirement, is not likely to cause some catastrophic consequence, right? Um, if your risk assessment was done a month late, well, maybe your state might assess you as not meeting that standard, but you're not probably going to be de-designated as a community action agency because that happened, right? Now, I do want to say some of the standards are tied to legal requirements, and so missing those standards has way bigger implications than, just missing a standard, right? Like if you're not filing your 990s, if you're not completing your audits on time, friends, those things can get you into some major trouble. But again, I want to say, overall, if you miss a standard, if you got your timing wrong, something happened, you might end up on a corrective action plan, but it is not likely that you're going to end up in some major trouble. The other caveat I do want to give, though, is that if you're consistently missing org standards, then we have a pattern, right? Especially if you're missing the same org standard over and over again, in which case your state may move to de-designate your organization for non-compliance, right? So, you miss one standard once, probably not, the end of the world. And you want to make sure that you're giving care and addressing the root cause of why you missed that standard, right? To ensure that you can get into compliance for the future, that you don't have this pattern of ongoing non-compliance. So I hope that that lowered your blood pressure a little bit. And then on the next slide, the other thing I want to say is that, the org standards are only a piece of the compliance picture of your organization. Guys, you get monitored on, about 10,000 different things and programs and in different ways all of the time. Again, you could have 100% on your org standards monitoring and have some other issues in your CSBG contract monitoring. These are not assessing your organization in the same way. Org standards are incredibly important, and they're only a piece of your picture, okay? So I want to pause here before I go into how we approach the org standards and just check in. Do folks have any questions? Do they have any reflections? Is anyone's blood pressure a little bit lower? No questions. Thank you, Jenny. That is helpful. Just saying, nope, I'm good is also a really good answer. Terry, anything you want to add?
No, I think you're 100%, Mary Beth.
Okay, all right, I'm getting thumbs up. That's wonderful to see. Then, okay, then how about if we move on ahead and want to talk a little bit about how you can approach the organizational standards, right? So now we have the background. There's 58 standards, but no matter what standard you're looking at, there are some common things that you can do to be able to approach the standards successfully. Okay, so now we're going to start building up your foundation a little bit more before we start looking at specific standards. Something really important I want to say to everyone on this call is that a really key skill for your organization when it comes to the standards is to remember that the standards are bigger than any one person or one role within the CAA. A lot of times there's a person that you designate to be the coordinator of the standards, make sure all the documentation gets in. Number one, be very nice to that person because it's a heck of a job, right? Give them lots of chocolate and lots of coffee whenever the time comes that they have to submit the standards. And number two, the reality is that that person isn't doing all of the things, right? They're probably not doing all the stuff with the board, and they're definitely, I hope, not doing the paying the taxes and filing the 990 and doing the ED's evaluation, right? Like no one person does all of these things. So you've got to be sure that you have a good, solid team who understands their roles and their interplay within the organizational standards, okay? So on the next slide then, whenever you're looking at the organizational standards and obviously you want to understand how you can comply with them, um, we have some advice for you. The first thing is when you read the standard is to slow down and take a minute and ask yourself, what does this standard say I actually have to do? What is the actual requirement, right? Um, you can reflect on what's it trying to get to? What does the state require? What does the law say? What does the rules say? But stop and slow your roll and make sure that you're actually reading just the requirement of the standard. Because sometimes what I find is that folks who are having a really hard time with the standards, they're maybe reading in additional requirements that aren't there, or maybe they're trying to do we want to do the best class practice, and that, is great for your organization, but that may not be what is needed to actually meet the standard. Okay. So first and foremost, get clear on what is the minimum I have to do? What do I have to do to meet the standard? What documentation will I have to get to show that this happened, right? A lot of states do have guidance on, what kinds of documentation you could upload or show. But, think about what do I have to actually get? What kinds of piece of paper do I have to get to show that we've done this thing? I've said this already, but any time that you have a question about this, you need to contact your CSBG state office because they are the ones who can advise you on any, hey, what does this actually require? What's that paperwork look like? I have this piece of paper. Does that work? It's only your state who can answer that question. And then just another point, and this sounds funny, is to make sure that you read the standards both by themselves, but then also remember to look kind of at the bigger picture because there are standards that connect to each other. So that means what I mean by that is that like if you don't say collect customer satisfaction, right? Which one of the standards requires. There's another standard later on in category 6 that says that you're going to integrate your customer satisfaction data into your community assessment and then into your strategic plan. So if you were to say miss that standard, then you could have this kind of domino effect where you're missing multiple standards because you missed that one, right? So make sure that you're looking at and thinking about where do these standards have connections to others that I need to be paying attention to as well. And by the way, that can also like impact your timing of things, right? Like when do I do my community assessment in order to have the data to put it into my strategic plan, right? You have to be making those connections on the front end. So this is the interactive part, friends. So find your unmute buttons or get your typing hands ready. Okay, we want to try looking at this standard, which is standard 1.2, and it says the organization analyzes information collected directly from low-income individuals as part of the community assessment. So we just talked about the requirements, right? What is something that you see that you have to do to meet this standard? What would you have to show that you did to meet the standard? What do you have to do? Do a community needs assessment. Yeah, right? Like, yeah, we got to do the community needs assessment. Okay, what else? What do we have to do in that community needs assessment? Ask clients, collect information from people with low incomes specifically. And what do we got to do with that information that we collected? Read it. Yeah, you got to read it. There's a very specific word in here, right? Analyze. That's right. You have to analyze the data, right? So you have to do the community assessment. It's got to include the voices of people with low incomes. And then you have to be able to show that you actually analyzed the data and did something with it. Okay. Awesome. You all did great. And Terry is giving out virtual chocolate in the chat. Virtual chocolate has no calories, friends. So that's my favorite part of it. So back to my earlier point about you could do this standard and maybe you wish that you had done focus groups, right? Or maybe you wish you had done more surveys or whatever it may be. But there is no requirement here that says, and you have to do this by doing a focus group and doing a survey and doing and doing and doing. And sometimes where folks get into trouble is they think that they have to do it a certain way, and it's just not required within the standard. You get to choose how that is met. Um, how would you think you would document that you've fulfilled this requirement? How might you show your state, or what do you upload in your portal to show that you've met this standard normally? The CNA. Yeah, we upload the CNA, right? The summary. We show the data. We show people that we did the thing, right? Perfect. Yeah, board meeting minutes can be helpful too to show that it ultimately went to the board and was approved. That's helpful. Or maybe that we did the analysis of the customer data, right? That could happen too in a board meeting. Absolutely. Um, hey, do you think that this connects to any of your other standards? Strategic planning, it sure does. It comes right back up in strategic planning, doesn't it? Um, yeah, so this is going to connect to a number of places. There's a whole category that talks about customer and community engagement. There's a whole category for community assessment, by the way. So this is a standard that's in category 1 that is not actually in the community assessment category. So you've got to be paying attention to all of those linkages, right? So awesome. Y'all did great. Thank you for that. Let's try one more. Let's try one more. So here's standard 2.1. The organization has documented or demonstrated partnerships across the community for specifically identified purposes, and those partnerships include other anti-poverty organizations in the area. So what do you see that you have to do here? What do you have to do? What's your requirement? Yeah, you got to document those partnerships. You got to have them and you got to document them. How might you document them? What kind of documentation might you show the state that you've done this? Yeah, MOUs, common goals, a spreadsheet. Yeah, Deborah, I love that you put the spreadsheet in the chat because MOUs are wonderful and MOUs are not appropriate for all relationships, right? Sometimes I just have a referral partnership with you or we coordinate on a particular community event, right? No money's exchanging hands. So it's not appropriate for us to have an MOU. So it would be okay in some cases to show, here's the listing of all of our partners. That's what my organization did. And we would mark off, hey, here are the agencies that we do have MOUs with as well. Yeah. I love this idea of website acknowledgement. Oh, I love that too, to show like, hey, we don't do this work by ourselves. We do this with, an incredible group of other mission-aligned organizations, sitting on advisory committees, other nonprofit board meetings. Yeah, tracking where referrals are coming from. All of these things can help you to document exactly 2.1. And this is going to link to some of your other standards as well, right? Like, when it comes to community assessment, you have to gather input from other organizations. Well, some of these organizations that you have partnerships with in 2.1 are great organizations to tap for your data collection and your community assessment. So, okay. Friends, y'all did great. I appreciate that. You didn't make me sit here and suffer, and I love you for it. So thank you. Okay, so then let's go on to the next slide. So here's another really key skill to kind of keep in mind, and it kind of goes back to that earlier point about teamwork. Those last two standards that we talked about tied to community assessment, but they might have also tied to roles of other folks in your organization, right? Maybe you have a development manager who does the relationship building, or you have a different person perhaps who analyzes your data than the person who collects the data. And so it's really, really important that you have a shared understanding across your organization um, amongst those people who are going to have to touch and be engaged with the organizational standards. And so building that shared understanding, it takes a little bit of time, but a couple things that you can do to help aid this along in your organization um, is, identify those requirements, which we just did, and then make sure that you share them out with the people who are going to be responsible and set the expectations, right? What does it mean for us to meet this standard within our organization? How do we show that we met this standard? How do we document it? And who is responsible for it, right? And then you can build out your organization's specific process for who does which standard, what do they have to do, where do they store the information, and when does that happen? So building that shared understanding is really, really critical. And that brings us to our next slide, which is about once you understand what you have to do, then you're going to be implementing all of these practices, right? You're going to be running your community assessment on an ongoing basis. You're going to be running your strategic planning process, right? One of the best things that you can do to help ensure that your organization meets the organizational standard, not just today, but into the future, is to just build the requirements into the way that you do your work. And one of the best ways to do that is through your standard operating procedures or your just kind of your agency policies and practices. So just build that right into the way that you do your work. If you're going to be, running your community assessment, have your SOP that says, we run these 4 focus groups, we use this assessment, and it all gets documented and stored wherever you store it, so that no matter who sits in the chair and runs the community assessment, it's done the same way. Always be clear about who's responsible for what, because if it's everyone's job, it's no one's job, right? Our other best advice for you about the standards is to document the standards as they occur. A lot of times states want you to upload the documentation at a certain time period, maybe the end of the year. And if you're waiting until the end of the year to go look for all that documentation, man, there are some elves on our desks and they steal things, right? And in our computers too. So, you know, uh, uh, get to the documentation, get it filed before the elves get it is my best advice. Document the standards as they occur, have that standard place that you put your documentation. The other advice that I have for you, I don't know how many of you are new to your role. A lot of us who came into community action and have the joy of dealing with the org standards, somebody told us, hey, guess what? You're going to be doing the org standards now. And you probably had to figure it out, right? Well, what does that even mean? How do we do that? Who's in charge of what? And a lot of times it's because we're so busy doing that we don't write down, right? How we do that practice. Be kind to the person who will likely come behind you at some point, because one, I hope you move up in community action and stay in community action, or two, I hope that you win the lottery and that you remember community action when you win the lottery. But think about that person who might have to come behind you and how helpful and kind you could be to them by documenting what you do so that when they come in, they know what the heck to do, right? And that's one of the best ways that you can give care to your organization long term, is to write down and formalize what you do, which is on the next slide. Formalizing your approach, developing those guidance and tools are going to help everyone within your organization know what they need to do, and it protects your organization if and when there is turnover in your organization. So on the next slide is another example of, here's another standard that customer satisfaction data and customer input collected as part of the community assessment is included in the strategic planning process. Well, gosh, how might you make sure that the requirements of that standard are part of your standard approach? How might you make sure that that always happens? How might you do that? And I just said it. How might you make sure that always and forever that the customer satisfaction data and customer input are collected as part of your community assessment? A planning calendar, yeah, an SOP, yeah, put it into the calendar. When do we collect our customer satisfaction data? Put it in your procedure. That's right. And this is one of those standards that, so now we're actually, standard 6.4 is in category 6, which is strategic planning. really one of the places that you're going to be putting this requirement is in your community assessment SOP, right? And then also you probably have a strategic plan SOP that you want to make sure that this shows up as well. All right, on the next slide, because I'm a nerd, I gave you this information on policies and procedures and their difference. And this is a really nice article that you can read from Power DMS about a policy versus a procedure. They are different. But here's one of the big things I want you to take away from this is that it is really all well and good to put things into writing, but people need training and they need ongoing training to ensure that they understand the policy. Again, turnover happens all of the time. And so how do you make sure that folks know the policies and understand the policies? And then you need some accountability measures, right? To make sure that the policy is being implemented as intended. And if you have these three things work together really well, you can make sure you're not just operating and meeting minimum requirements, but you're really operating in excellence. So put that thought before you as well. Okay, I will stop being a nerd and we will move forward. Terry's like, it's not possible for Mary Beth to stop being a nerd. I know her, she does it all the time, but okay. So
I did not say that
yeah.
out loud.
Yeah, yeah, out loud. That's right. So some guidelines here for identifying and implementing your policies. Look at those standards that involve those really routine things that you're going to do on an ongoing basis. Determine the best place to put those into policy, and just get them in place, right? So for instance, your board annual updates on the success and strategies of the community action plan, maybe that goes into your board policies and procedures, or it goes into your board calendar. Maybe it goes into an action plan. Maybe it goes into both, right? There's no right answer, just a right answer for your organization. I'm getting an alert that my connection is unstable. So FYI, if I come in and out, I'll call back in. So ensure that your policies are really clear. And just like another pro tip, just avoid the weeds wherever possible. Don't drive yourselves crazy either. It's really easy when you get into policy to start getting weedy, and that doesn't help you either. Okay. Another point here for you about the org standards and building your capacity to make sure you don't just meet the org standards today, but into the future. Um, you know, it's helpful to integrate your assessment of making sure that you've met the standards into your regular processes. What I mean by that is that before you click check or write check beside the community assessment, that you have maybe a checklist that you go down to make sure that all of the requirements that you have on your org standards and probably some of your state guidance as well are there. Because some of these things, once it's done, it's really hard to go back and amend that. And these are the kinds of things, back to what I said earlier about sometimes you miss a standard. Sometimes these are the things that get you into trouble because you finished the process without integrating that other requirement and the ship has sailed, right? So make sure that before you click done on your community action plan, that it actually meets all of the requirements for the standards and your funding. Okay. And then on the next slide, one of the key skills that you really need here to be successful is to manage that documentation. I talked about the elves that seal our documentation and our socks. And so get really clear about how you want to manage your org standards documentation. Do you want to have a SharePoint site that, people upload the documentation as it happens? Do you have a physical file folder somewhere? Do you, have a shared drive? I mean, whatever that may be, you've got to set up your policy and your practice of where it lives, who puts it in, what do they put in, when do they put it there? Okay, so make sure you've got that SOP or that standard process somewhere within your organization. I have just a few more points and then I promise you I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Terry. Um, you know, the org standards, it is really easy to fall into a place of like, let's just be compliant, right? Like, let's just get it done and check the box. And, community action, agencies or our communities don't just deserve compliant community action agencies. They deserve the best of the best. And I firmly believe that. And so you can really use your organizational standards as a way to focus in on some key practices that if you really did them to the best of your ability, you could not just be a compliant organization, but a really strong organization and the kind of organization that your community really needs and deserves. And so on the next slide, one of the things that you can do on an ongoing basis to support this is to evaluate, on a deeper level every couple of years. You pick a category or two to say, how are we doing here and what could we be doing better, right? Another thing that you can do is to benchmark your performance across all of the standards over time. Look to see if I'm missing standards consistently. Is there a core something that we're missing? Is there something we need to do differently? Maybe we need to communicate differently. Maybe we need to change our calendar. Maybe we need to change when we gather documentation, right? But, benchmark your performance and stop and ask yourself, you know, um, are we really doing this to the best of our ability? And then the last point I have is that, and my state office friends on the line, they always love when I say this, but um, you know, when you go through your standards, if you find that you are consistently missing a practice or you're struggling all the time with the same thing, you know, it's okay to go to your state and ask for help with that practice, or to ask for training, or to ask for support to help you be able to fulfill those requirements. Your state is here to help. They may have funding available. They really want to see you be successful. Also, your state association friends, you have a fabulous state association. Um, and they want to give you good, relevant, supportive training as well. You have a great conference every year. Call up your state association and say, hey, we're really struggling with this. Can you help us get some good training on this topic? And you can really leverage what you learn about yourself from the org standards to help you make those asks. So, okay, hopefully state offices and state association friends on the call were still friends after I said that. So sending everyone your way. Perfect. So some of what you're going to see Terry and I do as we talk more specifically about the standards themselves is do this balancing act. We want to help you understand what do you have to do to fulfill the requirements of the standard. And we are big believers in checking the box is great, but really we want to see you fully living into the intent of the standard, right? To the best practice. So we're going to tell you what you need to check the box, and we're going to try to give you some support to be able to go beyond just compliance and just checking the box and make sure you're being the best organization you can be. The next thing I want to be sure that I do is just kind of acknowledge the moment that we're in. I've given this org standards training, I don't know how many hundreds of times, and I've never done it in a moment like this. And so there's a lot of, uncertainty that our network faces in this moment. And it's more important than ever that we be really, really solid internally and be the best organizations that we can be. But I also know the incredible stress of the moment, and that stress can just make a lot of this stuff a whole heck of a lot harder. Okay. So I do want to say too that there are some ways to navigate uncertainty and to move forward in a way that builds ourselves for tomorrow. And some of the practices that you see in the org standards, I again believe can help us be better for tomorrow. And some of the things that you're going to see Terry and I hit on in the next 2 days while we're together are these topics that you see here. Really leaning in on understanding our purpose and using our purpose to help guide us and propel us as we respond to a changing context. Really be focused on the planning that we're doing and be prepared to change as things change, understand where we are and build good plans. And then also a common theme you're going to see is just communication and leadership. We've got to communicate, and communication is like a huge building block of leadership. You can't be a leader if you can't communicate. So we're going to hit on that as we go throughout this time together. And just, one of the key things to remember is that your purpose, your mission is what is most, most, most important. And creating space where you can ask yourself, what does my purpose, what does my mission tell me to do in this moment, can really be a helpful practice to be responsive. And even when you're looking at the standards and how you want to implement the standards, right? What does my mission call me to do, right? Again, you can check the box with your customer engagement. You absolutely can, but is that what your mission calls you to do? Really and truly? Um, or is that what your values call you to do? So don't lose sight of your purpose, even as we're talking about some of these more compliance-based pieces. So, okay, I'm going to pause here. Any questions, reflections? Um, Michelle, we will be sharing the slides and the recording, right? Right, Sabrina? We'll put out the recording as well.
Yes, it's recording and we will have slides for everybody.
Wonderful. Yes. So you don't need to furiously take notes unless that's how you learn, in which case, continue. Any other questions, thoughts, reflections? Terry, one thing I don't think we mentioned at the top of this as well is that we do plan to actually give you breaks because, again, we want you to still like us.
Yeah,
Terry, should we do maybe a quick stretch break here, do you think?
I think so. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah. Why don't we take 5 minutes here and just get up, stretch, and then let's come back right after the top of the hour and we'll pick back up. See you in a minute.
All right. I think we are at 5 minutes. So hopefully everybody had a minute to get up and stretch, maybe get something to drink. I'm actually going to take over here unless Mary Beth had any last words. No? Okay. Go ahead.
I might just add, I mean, I think I said it, but we do not plan to cover every standard and how you document that or meet that standard. We're trying to focus in on standards that, we think are really core to the moment or that we think are really essential or that are commonly missed, honestly, or standards that we get questions about. That being said, friends, if there is a specific standard you want to see us talk about, you can put it in the chat. If you don't feel comfortable saying it to everyone, you can message it to Terry or I, and we'll be responsive to that as well.
Correct. Yeah, thank you. And we'll have some time, even if you feel like, oh, I don't want to say that right now because I don't want to put them on the spot. We'll be back together tomorrow, so we can certainly build that into our time tomorrow as well. So I'm going to start talking about some of the standards in Category 5. We felt like it was important to focus on board governance because our boards are core to who we are. And they set the direction for our organizations. And so, having that strong leadership at the board level is really important to making sure that we can move towards mission fulfillment, as well as make sure that we are accountable to our communities and to our funders. So let's talk a little bit about, what do our boards look like? Basically, and I didn't see anybody come into the chat to talk about being from a public CAA, so I'm going to lean into my area of comfort, which is the private CAA board. But certainly if you do have, if you are with a public CAA, let us know. It's easy enough to pull those differences out for you. But basically, our boards of directors, they're the governing bodies. They set that kind of high level vision for us. They review and make sure that our missions are on point for the needs in our community, and they really set just the general strategic direction. Important to recognize that our boards are comprised of volunteers. We do, as recipients of CSBG funds, we do have a requirement that we have a tripartite board structure, and we'll take a little bit of a look at what that means. But especially for private nonprofits, it's important to recognize that even though we're talking about CSBG organizational standards, our boards of directors are responsible for the entire organization, for everything that we do. They are our fiduciary agents. And so again, they are the legal, the governing body and the legal entity responsible for our organizations. So again, during a time of uncertainty, it's even more important that we have solid boards, that our boards are functioning properly, that they're following the proper processes, that they are acting independently, that they are coming together as a body and really considering what is the best direction for our organizations to go, and that they're not what some people may say rubber stamping ideas that are coming from outside the board, but again, that they are acting as a body to really provide that direction to our organizations. We need to make sure that the information that we are providing to our boards is good quality, that they are getting the information that they need to inform their decision making for our organizations. We also want to make sure that we have good board engagement, right? So we want to make sure that our board members are receiving the information that they need, that they are communicating, and that they are actually coming to the board meetings with ideas and thoughts and proposals that they can put on the table to discuss to really help our organizations move forward. And then, of course, again, the tripartite that we will take a look at in a few minutes. And it's extremely important. It can be difficult. In the best of times, it can be difficult to keep a full board but we really want to make sure that at this time, especially, we are making every effort to. I'm going to go into the next slide, but I'm not going to read all of these to you. We are going to provide slides that have all of the standards for the categories that we discuss at the beginning of our presentations for each category for your reference later. So trust me, I'm not going to read all of these. All right, these are all of the. Okay, so I said we'd talk a little bit about structure and composition. So one of the things we want to be really cognizant of is making sure that our board meets the legal requirements for its structure. Mary Beth talked earlier about, not all standards are created equal, but that we really want to lean into the ones that are legal requirements. So our board structure is one of those requirements. But beyond that, having a good tripartite board structure really provides the foundation for your organization to live into the values of community action, because that is core to who we are. That tripartite structure really helps us to center the voice of people with low incomes, which is, again, that maximum feasible participation that was core to our very creation. It also builds power and opportunity within the communities that we serve, and it provides for that local control, multi-sector collaboration that, again, is so unique to community action and is one of our strengths and has been historically. So let's lift up standard 5.2. So the standard is that the governing board has written procedures that document a democratic selection process for low-income board members, and that process is adequate to assure that they are representative of the low-income community. So the intent here, right, is to make sure that our board complies with the consumer sector selection requirements within the CSBG Act. So what does that mean? We need to have written procedures regarding how representatives from the low-income sector are selected. Board member selection needs to be either in the bylaws or in a separate document, but we need to have that written down. And then the selection process needs to conform to federal and state guidance regarding democratic selection processes. And this is a great opportunity for me to let you know that we are going to be providing a lot of resources to you where you can do deeper dives into some of these topics. So we'll pull those forward as we move forward as well. But when we talk about that low-income sector selection process, the requirement is that at least 1/3 of our members of the board must be democratically selected, right? So that really makes sure that we have the voice of our customers centered in our organization, but not just that we're listening to those voices, but really that people with low incomes are provided with an opportunity to be decision makers and are provided with the opportunity to really influence the way that the organization is going to impact their communities. Important to note that the representatives don't have to be people with low incomes themselves. They can represent low income individuals in their communities. And so the democratic selection processes really can be designed by your organization. So it might be that we have an election that is publicized, that it's going to be at a certain place at a certain time on a certain date. You may have virtual elections, and I'm just going to mention this and ask Mary Beth to share more if we need to share anything more about micro democratic selection processes, if allowed by the state. I have no clue whether your state allows that or not. Say anything, Mary Beth?
A micro-democratic selection process looks like you might go to other bodies who are made up of elected representatives to select someone to sit on your board. So when I worked at a local agency, we had these neighborhood councils that or neighborhood kind of committees who are throughout our community. Folks were select or elected to be on those boards, and we would go to them and ask them to each name a representative to sit on our board, and it ensured that we had geographic representation, and then that representation already reflected the input of our community. So, but not all states allow for micro-democratic selection process.
Okay, thank you. So that's something that you would definitely, if you were going to look into that process, you would want to make sure that's allowable in your state. So here's one of those resources that we talked about. Our friends at CAP Law are just, premier resource for us. So they have a resource called Raising the Low Income Voice, Case Studies in Democratic Selection Procedures. Wonderful process, wonderful handbook. So check it out if you are looking to either, just confirm your processes or perhaps revamp your processes, revise your processes. All right, let's take a look at standard 5.5 next. So this is regarding your governing board meeting in accordance with their requirements and their meeting quorum. And here's the tough part, that they are filling board vacancies as set out by your bylaws. So it takes a lot of intentionality, preparation in advance, having a list of likely candidates before you need it to fill board vacancies is something that I've seen work well. But the intent of 5.5 is to really make sure that the board is operating according to its own bylaws, right? So the board needs to demonstrate that they are meeting their own bylaws and acting in accordance with their own bylaws in 3 specific ways. How often they meet. They can meet more often, but they should not meet less often than their bylaws specify. We want to make sure that there is a quorum that is obtained for all formal board decisions, and that all of those specific bylaws regarding what a quorum is, and how a quorum is established and maintained, that all of those bylaws are being heeded. And then again, that those vacancies are filled as required by bylaws and also as required by any other guidance that you may have. So when we think about documentation, where are we going to look? We're going to look in our bylaws, of course. We're going to look in board minutes for documentation of specific board actions. And then we want to maintain an up-to-date board roster as well. And keep some of that basic information in terms of when they were seated, and make sure that folks can tell when a vacancy was actually filled, so that they can make sure that's in accordance with the bylaws. All right, so what about those bylaws? Who creates the bylaws? The bylaws are actually created by your board, right? But we want to make sure that we are sharing our bylaws with our board members. Don't assume that everybody knows what's in them. And because the bylaws are created by your board, they can be amended by the board. However, we always want to make sure that any amendments are compliant with federal, state, and local requirements. And then within your bylaws themselves, there's going to be a process that's outlined for how the bylaws need to be revised. So there's a process within your bylaws that will speak to that. And so make sure that those requirements are met and that you are still in compliance with all federal, state, and local requirements, and make the changes that are going to help your board to function better. An example that I can share easily is during COVID, the state association where I was ED at that time, we thought, oh, easy peasy. We won't bring folks all the way across the state to come in for board meetings. We'll just meet virtually. Problem? Our bylaws specifically said that the meetings would be in person. So we had to go meet in person, follow the procedures, and we changed that. So again, it can be changed. You just want to make sure that you are following all of the proper procedures. But in the end, it's really about more than just recruiting board members. We really need to make sure that our board members are engaged. And so we want to make sure that we provide them with the right um, starting point on our board. So how can we do that? With a good orientation. So let's talk about that a little bit. We want to make sure that we have a process in place for providing a structured orientation within 6 months of them being seated. We want to make sure of that, because if not, they are not going to have the opportunity to really understand their key roles and responsibilities. And so we're not setting them up for success in terms of being a good board member. So the interpretation of 5.7 is that as Mary Beth said, kind of the existence is here, right, in the standard, the existence of the orientation process, but it really doesn't say what that content is. It doesn't say, oh, and important to note that our board members are volunteers, so therefore we can't compel them. We can't say, you will be here Tuesday at 2 p.m. for the orientation. And so technically the standard doesn't even require participation, just that you have the process in place and that you deploy that process that you have. All right, so how are we actually going to document this? So you want that board orientation policy or whatever it is that you put together to describe the onboarding process for your board members. And then when you seat a new member, of course, that will be noted in the board minutes. And it could also perhaps note elements of board orientation. Again, this is not required by the standard, but it is a good practice. And Mary Beth is helping us out by putting tons of information in the chat, lots of links that you guys can go to and provide some additional information. When we think about orientation, again, it's really an opportunity to set expectations, get the required training, gather any documentation from our board members that we may need, and really build that broad board engagement. Some of the things we typically see covered are kind of the history of community action or organization. Definitely want to get folks familiar with our mission. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see some of the core elements that are typically included in a board orientation. I wonder, is there anybody who would like to maybe describe what your board orientation process might look like? Anybody? Okay, well, think about it. And again, if you're not familiar, maybe that's a question. What does our board orientation look like? All right, Mary Beth has popped these two links in the chat already. Board Source is not a community action agency, but they really have a good orientation checklist that you could use. And again, CAP Law has many, many, many resources for us, including board roles and responsibilities. I see Pamela said we provide a board manual and virtual or face-to-face orientation. Awesome. I bet most of you at least provide a board manual. In the agency I worked for, it was one-on-one meeting with the ED, okay, as well as a rotation of trainings throughout the calendar year. Okay, all right, thanks. Anybody else? Let me see. All right, let's talk about 5.8. So leaning right into what Michelle just mentioned, it is important that our board members have been provided with training on their duties and responsibilities as board members within the past 2 years. So again, that training is what gives people the information and the knowledge and the tools necessary to really do their jobs effectively. In terms of what this means, Information Memorandum 82 talks about board training and orientation. The recommendation is that they be trained in terms of understanding their legal or fiduciary aspects, as well as leadership responsibilities to lead us towards mission fulfillment. But again, the standard does not prescribe the content. It doesn't say the frequency. So minimum compliance with this that really doesn't ensure that you're going to have those well-trained board members. So I appreciate Michelle saying, that rotation of trainings throughout the calendar year is how you're going to be able to help your board members have the knowledge to make the critical decisions for your organization. So how are we going to document this? Of course, board meeting minutes, the agendas from any trainings that we do, copies of training materials. Just really depends upon, what kind of documentation you can have based upon the manner in which the training is provided. A little caveat that the duties and responsibilities can be interpreted in several different ways. So we really want to make sure that we are showing that we are meeting our policies, bylaws, or other documents that describe the board training. So some of the ways, of course, that we can conduct trainings are either in person, often at a board retreat. That's something that agencies will host for their board members, webinars, of course, videos, and we're going to share a resource with you that is very handy dandy video set that you can use. Have some training modules. I know you guys have an LMS, so perhaps some training modules, conferences, and those one-on-one meetings. In some states, there may be some mentoring opportunities among board members, but again, you need to make sure that you're in compliance with any open meeting laws and those types of things. And so anybody have any other ways that you provide training to your board members? Okay. All right. You guys are
Gary,
quiet.
Well,
Yes,
well,
please.
maybe, well, it looks like folks
Maybe
are
they're
preferring,
thinking. Yeah.
it looks like folks are preferring the chat, which is totally cool. And I saw a really neat practice from an agency who they do site, I mean, they do site visits, right? Like it's not just an on-site tour, but it's like we're gonna come and like be on site as part of our ongoing, engagement with the board. Like every 6 months, they go out and they visit a different program, they get engaged, they volunteer. I mean, they do all kinds of different
Right.
things. And there is nothing like, you know, getting out and touching the really good work. Like our board members, man, they didn't sign up to be board members because they're really excited about approving board minutes and policies. They signed up because they really love the work, right? And so the chances that they get to go be on site, I think, are just so important.
I noticed here, Jenny, you say we encourage them to attend other conferences. That can also be very empowering. We see a lot of board members at like our conferences and our conventions. So yeah, that's another way. Also, some of your local organizations may have training that could be beneficial to them, and your state association of conferences, of course. All right, so here's another one of those resources. I think Mary Beth's already popped this in, perhaps. If not, she will. CAP Law has a board training series that are a series of short videos. One of the things I've seen done successfully to kind of provide that continual board training is to view one of these videos at the beginning of a board meeting and have some brief discussion about it. That again, it's very targeted, short, and an idea that we wanted to share with you as a way to provide that ongoing board training. So another thing that we wanted to lift up is assessing the board's performance. So it really, if we're looking at building excellent boards, board members really need to take the time to think about how are they doing, right? How are they doing in terms of board governance, in terms of recruitment and leadership? So this can really build some board clarity in terms of who they are and what their capacities are. And it also provides them with a baseline for thinking about how they might improve their own internal workings and their own processes that they deploy during their meetings. So there's no, actually, conducting a board assessment is not one of the standards, right, Mary Beth? But we recommend it highly. Again, if you're really thinking beyond just what is compliance, this gives your board, conducting regular assessments gives them the knowledge that they need to improve their performance. If you think about your own evaluation performance, performance, can I say that in the right order? Performance evaluations. Um, I come away knowing more about myself and how I can be a better employee. And I think boards as a whole can come away with ideas as well about how they can improve their interactions. Another handy dandy tool from CAP Law is an opportunity to have a template for meeting minutes and a way to kind of put any resolutions that are coming before the board together in a way that can be very easy to track and manage.
Terry, can I just throw in really quickly there? Friends, one of the most common reasons that org standards are missed is because the action was not documented in the minutes. We hear that all of the time. Yeah, the board did it, but we just didn't get it into the minutes. So lots of practices, lots of ways to help make sure that your minutes are good and reflective of what's actually happening. You can use a tool like this. Also, I've heard some great practices from other CAAs who on their agenda might mark, this is tied to an organizational standard requirement. That way, whoever's taking the notes, you know, make sure that it gets then into the notes, or, talking to the person taking the notes in advance to make sure that they know that that thing is going to happen and to be sure to get it documented. So, yeah, just your minutes are incredibly important. So, just
And
wanted to.
it's easy too. If you have a way of really setting those resolutions apart, and setting those board actions that are linked to specific standards, if you can easily recognize those, it's going to make it a lot easier when you try to document that you're meeting these standards as well. All right, so we've talked a little bit, and one of the things that you guys brought up was, calendaring, right? Scheduling things. So that is one of the things that we recommend that you really think about. I want to take just a few minutes here and give you guys an opportunity, just jot down individually when it is that these three things happen: that your board formally accepts your community assessment, that your board receives an update on meeting the goals of the strategic plan, and that they formally receive and accept the audit. So think about, when does that happen in your organization, and who's responsible for making sure that the board does what is necessary. And again, we're going to take just 2 or 3 minutes to think about it, and then let's see if we can get some of you maybe to come off mute and share with us. If not, pop it in the chat. We don't mind. So just take a couple of minutes. Feel free, as you think about them, feel free to go ahead and pop them in the chat. Let's start with: the board formally accepts the community assessment. When does that happen, and who's responsible? Every 3 years, Michelle says. So the board formally accepts the community assessment. You conduct it every 3 years, right? So is there a specific, perhaps, time of year that is typically calendared for the board? Every 3 years, calendared for the board? At the meeting following the completion of the report, okay? Who's responsible for pulling that together and getting it before the board? And are those two different people or groups of people? Planning director, okay, thank you. Planning and evaluation committee. Appreciate that, Rich. Is that a staff committee or is that a board committee that kind of pulls that together?
I'll unmute. I'll be the first one.
Thank you.
It is a combination. So it is actually staffed by a more planning director, but then also encompasses 3 board members.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that perspective. Appreciate that information. Thank you for coming off mute. Extra virtual talk. I see Jenny says after development at the very next board meeting, entire staff is partially responsible for different pieces. Okay, an intern for the CNA and the director has to get it on the agenda. All right, great. Anybody have look at Mary Beth with all the virtual chocolate. Anybody have anything else that they want to share about the community assessment? Anything different? All right, what about that audit? What does that look like? Anybody? Michelle almost came off mute. Okay. All right. I'm not going to pick on y'all.
I'll share.
Thank you. Look at this. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for the state association now in Minnesota, but just recently left a position at one of the agencies in our state. And so we typically would have our audit conducted. Well, we had let me back up to say we had a kind of a depository for all of the documentation preparing for the audit throughout the year. And so staff would just continuously feed that folder throughout the year so that when the auditors started asking for documentation ahead of their on-site visit, we'd be able to upload that and find it. And then when the auditors completed everything, which was usually around December of each year, then we had the board presentation, usually either January or February, to review the results of the audit, the letter, and any, just recommendations that they would have, and that would be presented to the board.
Great. Yes, thank you. And I see that Pamela shares a very similar process in the chat. And so, yeah, so the board has to actually accept that audit, right? So it does need to be presented by the audit firm. And so, yeah, thanks for that. So we kind of went through this to allow me to really drive home the practice pointer of developing that board calendar, right? So think in advance about the key activities that your board's going to have to complete, including those that are in the organizational standards, and then chart those out over the course of a year. And one thing I like to remind everybody is that if something needs to take place, say in January, then there may be materials or information that need to go a month or two in advance. So think about that in terms of if this is happening at the board meeting in such and such a month, when do the board members really need to get this information in time to understand it and be prepared to take action on it. So think about when your board meets and kind of when the distribution of that information needs to happen to enable them to be impactful and deliberate in their decisions. All right, so when we finish with each of the categories, when we're through reviewing the categories that we've selected, we'd really like to ask you guys about any challenges that you might want to bring forth regarding board engagement in government. If you have any best practices to share that haven't been brought to light during our conversation, or if you have any questions. So this is your chance before I turn things back over to Mary Beth for financial operations and oversight. Any last minute comments? Any challenges come to mind with the board standards? All right. I'm going to turn things over to Mary Beth. And if you do think of anything, again, please feel free to put it in the chat. And we can either circle back later if we have time, or definitely handle any more questions tomorrow that may arise. Mary
Okay.
Beth?
Terry, I think we had planned for a little break here. I know we just took one, friends. Why don't we just take another quick 5 minutes? We'll come back together, give your brain a rest, check your email. I know that's what you're doing anyway, so go check your email, and we'll see you back in about 5 minutes, okay? All right. I think that was right around 5 minutes. So give folks just another second to get joined back up. Terry and I really wanted to be your favorite people today, and so we put finance at the end of the day. I know. I know. Um, hey, if anyone, first off, if folks are back, can they use the react emoji, give me the thumbs up or give me some reaction? The reactions at the bottom. Okay, I see Ann. Okay. Oh, good. People are here. Oh, somebody reacted with effect. Like, love it. Okay, okay. Looks like we're here. Awesome. I am uh curious. Do we have finance people with us here today? Do we have financial friends with us? Oh, I see. I'm on the wrong chat. Yes, yay. Okay, awesome. We have finance people. Yay. So, oh, I love this. So, category 8, we have lots of finance people. I am new to CSBG though. That's okay. That's okay. Category 8 is all your bailiwick, all right? It's all those things about effective financial oversight. I mentioned earlier this idea that not all standards are created equal, and that some standards carry a bigger consequence if they're not, if you're not doing that practice. Many of the standards in category 8, if you're not doing what's outlined here, my finance friends will tell you, you have some bigger problems, right, in the organization. I'm going to call out a few of those things just because I think it's important to understand and recognize red flags, okay? But before I do that, on the next slide, whenever we come to this category, it does require a lot of this category requires some financial expertise. It requires your finance director. It requires your finance people, right, to be engaged. And we frequently hear this challenge of program staff and finance staff working together. But we know that when finance staff and program staff work well together, that we have stronger organizations. And so outside of just like wanting you to like meet the org standards, building relationships and functionality between and a bridge between your program staff and your finance staff is going to pay you dividends long term. One of the things I always say about uh, uh, that relationship with fiscal staff is just to remember, and program staff too, that we have different priorities, but we have common goals, right? So how program staff maybe want to advance things a lot of times in support of their customers. Our friends in the finance department might say, you can't do that because it's against the rules, or you can't do it that way, or I need this piece of paper, or I need this paperwork. And that's not because, I mean, and finance people back me up here, it's not because you're trying to rain on the parade of program people, right? Like it's a really hard thing to come back and say, hey, I need this to look different. We're actually not allowed to do that, right? Especially when we're talking about like client services. So but remember, our finance friends are really trying to keep us on track and keep us compliant. It's very important to them. And so we have different priorities, but at the end of the day, we're all working for the community action agency. None of us here are getting rich. And if you are, please tell me because I want to come work with you. But, you know, a lot of our finance people too could go work in the private sector, right? But you're choosing to work in a mission-driven organization. And so I think first and foremost, remember that we have those different priorities, but we share a common purpose. Also goes a long way to get clear on roles and responsibilities, right? Who is supposed to do what in the organization, and when it comes to that handoff between program and finance. The other thing is, making sure that staff know each other. Building those bridges across departments goes a really, really long way. I mean, Terry and I will tell you we spend, what do you think, Terry, 30, 40 minutes every month on the line on a call with our fiscal staff. And, otherwise we would only ever talk to them via email. but I feel like we get a lot more out of our relationship when we have those calls, right? I mean, like we can get so much more done, and it helps us to build some connective tissue for when, you know, they say to us, hey guys, you're not allowed to do that. Then Terry and I are like totally mad and fuming. We're like, okay, we know Christian probably actually really needs the thing, right? Because now we've built a relationship and had a joke together and all of that. And then just the last thing is remembering to train for mutual understanding. So some of you here are the program staff, your fiscal staff may not be here, and they may not understand the requirements of the organizational standards. And so making sure that they understand what the org standards are, why they're important, and how they are going to contribute to the org standards will go a really long way. If friends on the line have tips or advice for how to better work collaboratively across program and finance staff, we would love, love, love to hear it. While you're thinking about that, I will share that tomorrow I'm not going to be with you for the whole training tomorrow, in part because I'm going to be on a webinar about risk sensitive planning with the nonprofit Financial Commons, and I'm going to be on that call with Liz Cooppola from Minnesota. Um, and you know we're really lifting her up and her organization up as kind of a best practice in terms of risk sensitive planning. And one of the things Liz is going to talk about is how building the relationship between finance staff, program staff, the board has like positioned her organization to be well prepared when things change rapidly, right? And how it's made them more resilient. So I see Michelle also fangirled for Liz. I always fangirl for Liz. So there will be a recording of that if folks want to see that session, or if you want to share it with your finance staff who maybe aren't on this, it's a great thing to add. Anything else folks would add about, you know, building that relationship though? About what works? Liz is so smart. I know. I always am like, gosh, I want your brain. Oh my goodness. Okay. And like just through and through good person too. All right. So we are focusing on category 8 today, especially in this moment because our finances require our full attention um, as well. And so we're going to talk through a number of these standards, not all of them. You can see you have to do an audit. You know, the audit has to be presented by the auditor to the board. The board has to accept that audit. They don't approve the audit because they are not auditors, right? They're just accepting the audit. They have to address any any findings that they deem appropriate. You have to solicit for an auditor on an ongoing basis at least once every 5 years. Guys, that is so critical. Some of the organizations who get themselves into trouble, I would say my first question is always, what did the audit show? And in some cases, you know, what you hear is an agency maybe use the same auditor year after year. That auditor maybe got complacent, maybe just didn't see things as, you know, that the in a particular light. And so the organization didn't have the opportunity to really know, and the board didn't know about some of the deep trouble, right? So I know that that looks like a, yeah, just check the box, hurry up, solicit so that we can choose the same auditor again. I really invite you to think about, you know, to what extent is that really serving your organization? Okay, next slide is, you know, you do have to file your 990. That's one of those things that if you're not filing your 990 on time, you can get yourself into big trouble. You can lose your nonprofit status. So very essential to be compliant with that. You have to give regular reports to your board about the financial functioning of the organization because they're responsible for the financial well-being of your organization. Um, on the next slide, too, this is not one I'm going to talk about in depth, but all you have to make your filings and payments related to payroll withholdings on time. When organizations are in trouble, it's one of the first questions we ask. Have you been paying your taxes? Have the withholdings been actually withheld and sent on to the correct place? So that is really essential. And another one of those indicators, excuse me, of financial well-being in the org or process well-being within the org. The organization does have to approve an organization-wide budget, and you have to review your policies with some regularity to be sure that they're up to date and that you make changes as needed. You have to have a procurement policy too. I know that sounds lame, but you actually really do need one to be in compliance with uniform guidance. All of you are receiving federal funds. If you're receiving federal funds, you need to have a procurement policy, okay? And then you have to document how you allocate your shared costs through your indirect rate or your written cost allocation plan. I am not an expert in that, but golly, you should get one to help make sure that you're allocating your costs appropriately. And you need to have a policy in place for record retention and destruction. Yeah, oh my goodness, your comment in the chat. We also need to allow professional skepticism and to know it's not a personal attack. 1000% about your audit. So actually that ties really nicely to the next slide because that is the first standard I do want to talk just a little bit about. You are required, if you're receiving a certain amount of federal funding, you are required to have an annual audit that is completed by a CPA and it is done on time according to the uniform guidance. That audit has to be done by that external auditor, which you put out to bid every 5 years, as we stated. So you need to be sure that your audit is done in compliance with that requirement. And also, the audit has to be done on time. I've been hearing some real challenges around one, getting audits, finding auditors, especially in rural communities, and two, around getting them done in a timely manner. I talked to an organization not too long ago who was years behind on their audit, and that is a very, very real risk at any time, and especially in a moment like this. So on the next slide, just want to give you some of that additional guidance that you can bring back to your teams back home if you're not the person who does this. Guys, only a licensed CPA can do an audit. It can't be, the friend of the friend who knows some things about finance or took a QuickBooks course one time. It has to be a CPA. A review of like, hey, we looked at our books and everything looked good. That's not an audit. There are very specific things that have to be tested and looked at in an audit. And you need a single audit, not just a financial statements audit. Federally, the threshold at which you need a single audit is 1 million in federal funds. However, states may have lower thresholds and commonly do have lower thresholds. So make sure you know your state threshold for completing a single audit. There might be some differences in reporting formats. Make sure you know those. You don't have to know them personally, but your CPA probably does. And a step sometimes that is missed is that not only do you have to do that audit, but you have to post it to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, and you really should be doing that within 9 months after the end of the fiscal year. If it's taking you more than 9 months, your audit is now not being completed on time. One other thing I want to add here, if you're having trouble finding an auditor, right, or you think something is funny, guys, if you see something, say something, number one, check with colleagues, call your state association, call NCAP, right? We also, we don't endorse any one organization, but we can certainly send you organizations that we know who have done community action agency audits. Certainly Whipfly is a preferred vendor of ours who does audits all the time. So like if you're having trouble, there are so many resources in this network that we can connect you to. So please, please, please just reach out. I also want to go back to the comment in the chat about, it's not a personal attack. The point of an audit is to make sure that your organization has the required controls in place to administer funds effectively, right? Make sure there's no fraud. Make sure that even if there was the risk of fraud, that your system would be able to catch it. And so that auditor is coming in from that point of view and is going to give you feedback. And sometimes that feedback is going to be painful. And sometimes it's going to be painful because we know it's true. And we don't do ourselves any favors by, not admitting the truth or not really looking at the facts. So yes, make sure that you take what you hear to heart, really and truly. So, okay, enough of my soapbox. 8.1 documentation. Guys, you're going to have that copy of the audit report. You have to upload it to the Federal Clearinghouse. Make sure that you get that screenshot or that receipt that shows that you did it. And then, maybe you have a letter or something that says that you did it on time. So those are some of the pieces of documentation that you can use. So standard 8.3, this one usually gets me into trouble when I talk about this one, but it's all good. So the organization's auditor presents the audit to the governing board. And that may not sound controversial, but really and truly, what this standard says, it must be the auditor who presents directly to the board, not the auditor presents the audit to the agency director, and then the director presents the results to the board. Why do you think that might be? Why do you think we want the auditor to present directly to the board? The neutral perspective. They're going to tell it like it is. Not that our directors would ever do this, but if the auditor presents to it may be not even just the director, but if they just present to the finance committee, right, and then present it to the board, and then the board has questions, well, the finance committee didn't actually do the audit. The ED didn't actually do the audit. It's actually it's the auditor who can give the good information directly to the board. The board is the body that is ultimately responsible for the financial well-being and overall well-being of the organization. And so if there are risks, if there are red flags, the board has to know, and that is why it is so essential that auditor presents directly to the governing board, and it has to be the full board, not just a subcommittee of the board. Sometimes what we see when auditors present the audit to the board is they say, okay, guys, any questions? And then, the board stares back and blinks and kind of doesn't know what to ask. And in fairness, if you've never been through an audit, how do you even know where to begin, right? So I love this resource on the next slide. This is from the National Council of Nonprofits that has these 6 questions for board members uh, to ask the auditor. And so this can be good information to give your board members to help them understand how to engage and ensure that they're really fulfilling their fiduciary responsibilities as well, right? So I love these 6 questions, and really this guide from the Council of Nonprofits on the audit is a really strong resource. So you can check that out, and Terry will pop that in the chat in just a second. So okay, let's move to 8.3. So the documentation that you need, the documentation that you need for 8.3 is that, your meeting minutes that show that it actually happened, maybe the agenda, the, maybe the report that the auditor gave, but make sure that you've got all of that documentation lined up. So that's kind of all we have on the audit piece. I spent a lot of time there just because it's really, really, really critical. And again, if those things are not happening, you could have some bigger problems. So just scanning to look and see if I see any questions. I don't see anything. If you have questions, or if you want to chat more about this, please, please, please give us a shout. Oh, and then there's that link to the National Council of Nonprofits after the audit, and that great guide that you can help your board members to engage with the audit and ask good questions. Okay. Standard 8.7 also goes back to that fiduciary responsibility of the board, right? And making sure that the board has good information about the financial state of the organization. And so standard 8.7 says that the board receives financial reports at each regular meeting, and it has to include these 2 things at a minimum, right? the organization-wide report on revenue and expenditures that compares budget to actual, and it has to be categorized by program. And you have to have a balance sheet and a statement of financial position at each board meeting. So this does not include special meetings. So if you call a special meeting of the board, you don't have to give them a financial report, but you do have to make sure every regular meeting has these reports. You would not ever want to like defer the financials to the next meeting. That doesn't work. Like, oh, we put it on the agenda, but we just didn't have time. I mean, the board is responsible for the financial well-being. They have to be talking about the finances every time that they're meeting. And really, how these reports looks a little different across the board. And you have to figure out the right reporting for your organization. And ask your board, like, hey, how's this going? What else do you wish you had? How could we help you to better understand the financial status of the organization? I've heard a few times from agencies who, in addition to the numbers that they're putting in front of their board, the finance director is maybe including a couple of lines, a couple of statements beside each thing to help board members understand what they're actually looking at. So you can mix your qualitative stuff and your quantitative stuff as well. Oh, Michelle has a good question for us in the chat. I love questions. Is there any required number of board meetings per year or frequency in the org standards? No, there is no required. You must meet this number of times within the org standards. Federally, there is no CSBG requirement about how often a board has to meet. Your state nonprofit laws might have requirements about how frequently. And now I'm going to go into best practice. So yeah, I'm going right there. Some boards meet monthly. That can be a lot, but there might be times that makes a lot of sense for an organization. There might be boards who meet every other month, and I think every other month is probably the most common cadence, if I'm honest with you, and is probably a really good spot for a lot of boards to be, that every other month kind of spot, so long as there's not anything that's like really rapidly evolving or changing. Some boards meet quarterly, and that might work for some organizations, but I start to feel really uncomfortable when we get into the quarterly space, just because like there's a lot of things that have to go before the board. And if they're ultimately responsible for the well-being of the organization, like, can you really fulfill your fiduciary responsibilities only coming together once a quarter for an hour, hour and a half? I have questions. And maybe your board has figured out the way how. I don't know. But yeah, just some advice there. One other thing that I'll add, it's not here on this slide, but any of you who use a consent agenda, I also want to get myself into further trouble here. Any of you who use a consent agenda with your boards, which is a great practice, and we fully support the use of a consent agenda in board governance, you will never want to put your finances into your consent agenda ever. Your board has a fiduciary responsibility, and to fulfill that fiduciary responsibility, they have to be talking about and looking at and considering the financial condition of the organization. So consent agenda can be all of those normal, kind of run-of-the-mill things, approving the prior minutes, accepting this report, whatever that may be. But your finances should always be their own standing agenda item, and there should be time to talk about them in your board meeting. Okay, no one has yelled at me yet, so that's wonderful. All right, on the next slide, then, your documentation here for 8.7 is your board agenda. Show that it's on the agenda, show the board meeting packet, show those minutes. Maybe you're showing the email. By the way, you might not need to send all of this stuff, but just sending a few of these things can be very helpful just to make sure that you're documenting that the thing happened. So, okay, that was 8.7. 8.9 requires that you have that the board annually approves an organization-wide budget. Again, they're responsible for the organization. They have to know and understand where all the money is going. Um, and it's not enough to approve like a standalone, here's my CSBG budget, here's my LIHEAP budget, here's my Head Start budget, because sometimes program budgets can hide some of the overruns that might be happening, or you might not be able to just piece together the full picture, right? And so it's really important that the board approves that overall budget for the organization. And by the way, the board action is required. They have to approve it. They're not accepting, they are actually approving that budget. Also, not just a committee. Your finance committee is probably deeply engaged, or your treasurer is deeply engaged in the creation of your budget, but they're not the only ones who are responsible. The entire board is responsible, so the entire board has to approve your budget. So documentation for 8.9 is that copy of your approved budget. If you have a presentation that you give, that's great. The board meeting agenda can be good. The agenda doesn't really show that you actually did the thing, though. It's really in your minutes that you're going to document the board voted to approve the budget. Okay. I keep scanning the chat. If anyone has questions, comments, reflections, throw them in, or come off mute. Throw your voice into the space too. Because I'm going to move us ahead to 8.10. Oh, I think one of the biggest challenges with some of these requirements related to fiscal reporting, one of the biggest challenges with some of these. Oh, software. Yeah, I think software can be a major challenge. Um, making sure that your software can run all of the different reports that you need and do it in a timely manner. And yeah, I would agree, Michelle, that creates clear reports. That's a whole other thing. I can't think of a place that I've worked where we took the reports directly out of the software and just put them in front of the board. Terry, did you all, or did you all? Yeah, a lot of times we were like transferring it, adding context, putting it into a format for our board to know and understand. And I would say, don't be afraid to do that. Don't feel like you have to just take the format that your reporting software, that your software gives you, because the way and the data that your finance staff need are probably very different than what your board needs. So the software that's giving you really good data for your finance people may not be the same approach for your board, because they just need different things. There is a mint to be made for the person who figures that out. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would totally agree with that. If anybody has a software that they think is doing it really well, please share what's working really well for you. And there are some common systems that are used in CAAs. And I'll add that, like, if you're using a system and you're like, how are other people doing this? How are they reporting to their board? This is, again, a really good question for your state association to ask, hey, can you help me connect with my peers about, ask who's using this software. You can also reach out to NCAP. We might know people who are using different software and try to connect you. But your best call really is usually your state folks first. I'm looking to see if Sabrina's going to throw anything at me, but I haven't seen that happen yet. Or Tom. I mean, Tom might also, but no, not yet. Perfect. Okay. So then I do want to chat a little bit about 8.10. This says that the fiscal policies have been reviewed by the staff within the past 2 years, updated as necessary, with changes approved by the governing board. So this is one of those standards that has multiple things that have to happen. And it gets a little bit funky because one of those things might actually not happen. And in that case, the other thing doesn't have to happen. So what you have to do is you have to review the policies at least once every 2 years. That's to assure that the policies are being kept current with, the ever-changing landscape of fiscal, rules, right? It does not say that you have to update your policies every 2 years. Maybe you've reviewed and a policy doesn't need to be updated. But if it does, if there is any change that is being made to your financial policies, that needs to go before the governing board. So even if you're doing changes, maybe they just reviewed it last year, and now there's another change and you've made it, now there's been some federal change, and now you're making a change, that should go before the board. The board is the one who's ultimately going to approve those policies. So just make sure that you've got your written policies, you've got, we review it on this timeline, here's when it's been updated, and here's when it went to the board. Another really good practice here is version control, and to go, like in the footer or maybe on the second page of your document, that you put the date that this was revised. I know some agencies too have gone a step further and not just putting when this was revised, but also putting when the board approved the revision, like in their footer or in their uh, like the second page of the document, wherever they put that information. Yep. And then documenting this if no changes happen. When it comes to documenting this, if no changes happen, I mean, you have to document that the review happened, right? And that might be an email that is done internally. Maybe it is a report to the board that says, we reviewed our policies and determined no changes were necessary, therefore we're not bringing you any updates. I mean, you could do that too. I mean, there's lots of ways to kind of formally document what happened there. Okay, on the next slide too, if you're wondering like what goes into my fiscal policies, well, don't worry, uniform guidance, which is like, these are the rules that you have to follow if you're taking federal money, right? If you're going to take federal money, we have to ensure that you have some, just like the org standards, some basic things in place to make sure that you're going to be a good steward of that federal money. So uniform guidance are those rules. Here are some of the things that you are required to have written procedures for. You don't have, I'm not going to read all of these to you, but you've got to have those things around how you do your payments, how you determine costs are allowable, your fringe benefits, your conflicts of interest. So you want to make sure that you have a written policy on all of these things. And by the way, when you're looking to make updates, these might be some of the places that you're looking, right? Have any of these things changed, either state or federal? So make sure you include these things. So your documentation here are your fiscal policies I just talked about. Put in the footer, put in the second page, here's the version we're on. Here's when it was approved by the board. It's going to make your lives a lot simpler. Any kind of documentation where you've reviewed the policies. Oh, it might be a staff committee. It might even be your finance committee, who did that. So you might use that in minutes. And then anytime that there are changes, you want to make sure that you have that board's minutes that show the policies were ultimately approved. So that is the end of what we wanted to talk about specifically with Category 8. We've had a little bit of discussion, but I want to check in. Are there any particular challenges, any best practices? Are there any of these standards you're really struggling with and you want to chat about, or you just have a question about? Anything else we want to say about Category 8? Carrie, is there anything you want to add about Category 8?
No, I think you covered it well, Mary Beth.
Thank you. I'm not fishing for compliments, but I'll take it.
My performance evaluation is coming up, so I just want to get it in.
That's right. That's right. Okay. So if not, don't worry, friends. If you're getting sad that you think our time together is ending, we're not quite there, but we are almost there. So we want to put a bow on a couple of things that we've talked about here. Terry and I selected these two categories to talk about first. One, because one of the most common reason org standards are missed is because of things that aren't documented in board minutes, and kind of board functioning too kind of trips folks up on a regular basis. A board didn't meet, so they couldn't approve the thing, and that trips us up all the time. And two, we focused on category 8 because of the moment that we're in, right? Our finances are more important than ever. And so just to tie together these concepts, and I'm going to string in one more standard before we go. Um, your boards are responsible for the financial well-being of the organization. And um, a couple of months ago, we put together this discussion guide to help boards have the conversations about the organization's finances, especially when things are a little uncertain, right? Um, a couple of the things that you will find in here, you can put this guide right in front of your boards. There are some great discussion questions for your board to have to get clear and get aligned about how, the kind of risk that they want to take, what they think is most important, um, what they need to do to be responsive in the next, 30 days or whatever that may be. So this is a really good, simple guide that you can use. Again, our board members may or may not come from a finance background, right? And so they might not even know, hey, can I ask a question on that? Am I supposed to be looking at this? I don't know, right? So this can kind of help to get your board on the same page about where they should be focusing, especially in uncertain times. So Terry put that link in the chat for you. Do check it out. The other thing we want to talk about, actually, one of the most common standards that we get questions about is actually standard 4.6, which is about risk assessment. And risk assessment is this is one of those practices that goes across both board governance and finance, right? Risk assessment is really a process, a systematic process for you to identify and prioritize any potential, oh yes, NHR, and potential or adverse conditions or events that will affect the achievement of your objectives. I must have taken that quote directly from somewhere and I didn't quite cite it, I guess. But it comes down to what are things that could happen that could impact our ability to achieve our mission, to achieve our goals. Risk assessment helps your agency to understand not just, what risks are out there, but how likely are they? And then you can use the risk assessment to help you figure out if you want to do any specific planning so you can mitigate those risks as best you can or manage them. So standard 4.6 requires organizations to have an organization-wide comprehensive risk assessment, and it has to be completed within the past 2 years and reported to the governing board. So the intent here is we have to look at our organization, see what risks we have, and the board has to know about those risks. That is really critical because as the fiduciary agent, they have to know those things that could impact the organization's ability to, one, sustain the mission or achieve the mission. So a few bits about the interpretation here. It has to be organization-wide. It's not just we're doing a financial risk assessment or we're just doing a program risk assessment. No, it has to be organization-wide. It has to be comprehensive. It's not just, the human resources side or that finance side. And then you do have to report to the entire board. And, this is one of those standards that this is a absolute best practice. Because on the next slide, it allows us to identify and plan for those things that could happen that could really sink our battleship, right? It also helps us to be able to respond quickly if some of those things happen, right? Risk assessments sound scary, but they really make our organizations a lot more resilient, right? Because you can scan what's going to happen and make the plan for what you would do if that happens. And it can really help you to lead and manage. So if you're going, yeah, but what's a risk? Like, well, here's a few, right? So what happens if our computer system goes down? Anybody have that AWS thing happen? Like anybody impacted by AWS on Monday, right? Like, so what happens if your computer system goes down? What happens if we lose a funding stream? What would we do? What happens if we have a natural disaster? I live in Kentucky, like tornadoes are a very real thing here, right? And I mean, I know agencies around me who have lost their buildings, right? So what happens if we couldn't even get into our buildings for a few months? So all of these things are what ifs And you don't want to have one of these things happen and then go, well, now what, right? You don't want to have the natural disaster and then go, how should we respond now? You don't want to have the ransomware attack and then go, what do we do now? Right? So the risk assessment, then on the next slide, really what it is meant to do is help you identify those things and then make the plan. So you do this on an ongoing basis. You're supposed to do it at least once every 2 years, according to the org standards. Really, in reality, you should be doing this annually. I mean, and especially in this environment, and I would even say you're probably doing more interim risk assessments in times that things are rapidly changing. So you might need to be doing that more frequently. You might need to have another way to kind of take a quick pulse check about how you're doing with your risk. So, okay. If you did not know and you're going, gosh, well, risk assessment, this sounds scary. I don't know where to start. You could go online and look for a comprehensive risk assessment, and you'll find that a lot of places will charge you an arm and a leg to do a risk assessment of your organization. At NCAP, we have worked with the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, which is, as the name indicates, a leading expert on risk management for nonprofit organizations. We went to them and we built a specific risk assessment that is free for all community action agencies to use. Free. This is totally free. Okay. So, Terry, I think what I might do just really quick, don't you love it when I go off script? Isn't it your favorite thing?
I was expecting this.
I'm going to show you all what this tool looks like just really, really quickly, because as I said, totally free and a great resource for you. And anyone who has used this risk assessment, if you want to say a couple things in the chat, that might be helpful for your colleagues as well. So you go to portal.nonprofitrisk.com/cap. You do have to create an account. I'm smart and saved my password, thank goodness. When you log in here, there's different levels. There's an administrator, and then there's like just kind of regular users. I'm an administrator of our account. So when I come into risk assessment, one thing I want to say is it takes a minute to load, and you will notice that and you will feel that. And it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Don't freak out. Okay, so because I'm an admin, I come into my admin console, and I can come here to my assessment. And what this thing does is they have all of these different modules. Remember when we said it had to be comprehensive? Well, check this out. You know, we've got transit, we've got special events, we've got fundraising, we've got contracts, we've got all of this, right? And so what you do is you come in here. I'm going to resume my contracts thing, and it will take a second to load. And I had already started this. So one of the nice things is you can start and stop because it does take a while. And it's going to guide you through specific questions. Does your organization maintain a cost allocation methodology? Yes, we do. And I'm going to click next, and it's going to take a second. And then, okay, well, insurance and indemnification. It's going to bring you through all of these kinds of guided questions. And there's a little progress bar so you know how you're doing. And at any point you can say, I need to take a break, and it will save your results and you can come back and pick up. At the end of this, what it will do is it will give you a really nice report that you can do a couple things with. One, you can actually organize your report and customize it to be, maybe you guys don't run transit, and so you don't want to include transportation. I could come in and say, I just want these 4 areas on our report. I could say governance is really high, and so I want to put that first in my report, and it will reorganize your report for you. And then you have 2 options here. You can either view your report, which this is the whole comprehensive everything, and this will take a minute. Or you can use that executive summary. And that executive summary can be a really nice thing to put in front of your board so that they're not having to go through every single one of these things. And so it tries to point out, here's where you're doing well, here's where you've got some issues, here's some advice of things that, based on nonprofit risk management principles, we think that you should be doing. So you can totally customize this. One other thing I want to make sure I say, I want to go back one. Let's say, I'm the ED, and I don't know the transportation risks. I'm not best suited to answer those questions. From your admin console, you can actually assign different levels or different modules to different people. So I could come in and say, I want transit to go to the transit director. I want HR to go to the HR director, let them do their inputs, and then we can look collectively at our overall risk assessment. So, one other thing I want to make sure I mention. Um, there is also the ability to ask risk questions. So you can always reach out to our friends at the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. They love to hear from you. If you bump into something that you're like, I don't even know what to do with this, they can help advise you on best practices or tools that they think could be helpful. Also, back from the portal side of this, I'm going to go back one. Under this member benefits and portal tools, this is where you can do the risk help. And then there should also be a policy section, but I'm not seeing it because I'm talking in front of a room full of people. All right, it's here. So if you're like, oh, it says I need to create a policy, I don't know where to start, there's a vault of policies that are already pre-made. You could come from these and pull from them and use them as a basis for updating your own policy. So again, all of this is totally free for all community action agencies, which I think is really cool. Okay, I wanted to show you that. Terry, did I miss anything? Any features I should talk about here?
No, I think you mentioned it. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that those draft policies are editable. So, it kind of gives you the structure, some sample language, but just because you access those, you're not locked into using exactly what they propose, but they're very, very useful. Cannot hear you, Mary Beth.
Oh, sorry about that. Here's one in the risk policy section, like I pulled a whistleblower policy because that's actually a policy I hear frequently people don't have. And I can add a policy to my vault. I can get it in Word. I can do it however I need to do it. So it's pretty nice. So my one caveat I want to give you about the tool. Remember when I said it's comprehensive? So like if you have like your board meeting like in the next 24 hours and you're like, I'm just gonna pop out this risk assessment real quick. That ain't gonna work because it takes a while to do your risk assessment. It's very, very comprehensive. So make sure you leave yourself plenty of time to do that. And rushing through it really doesn't get you the benefit of what the practice is meant to do. So, okay. I'll tell you, yeah.
Are you seeing my slides now, Mary Beth?
I
Again?
am. Yes. Thank you. So we get rave reviews on this tool all of the time. I hope that you will check it out. In the PowerPoint, there's all the things that I just showed you live. And so you can, if you need a refresher, you can check that out. By the way, I guess I should say too, if you're going to come to the Management and Leadership Training Conference not later this year, early next year in Orlando, Melanie Herman, who is the director of the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, is going to be our keynote speaker. And she's just going to be fabulous. I mean, I just love Melanie so much. She's so brilliant and just passionate about risk, which sounds crazy, but it's awesome. So, okay. Once you've identified risks, though, now I'm kind of going beyond the standard. I want to say the standard says you have to do this, you have to report it to the board, but really, it's important that you not just do the assessment. You're doing the assessment because you need to create plans where you've got potential risks, right? And you're not going to create a plan for every possible risk because you don't have time for that. One of the things you'll want to do is think about like how likely is a risk to happen and how severe would the impact be, right? Like maybe it's, excuse me, maybe it's likely that, we're going to have some, disruption to a funding source, but maybe that funding source, the severity wouldn't be so severe. And so we're not like, we're just going to accept that that risk might happen. We're not going to create a plan, right? Or maybe there are things that would be really severe, like a meteor could hit Earth, but it is not likely. Therefore, I'm not going to create a meteor evacuation plan or a zombie, apocalypse plan, right? So you really want to focus on those risks that are very likely and would have severe consequences for your organization. When you create those plans on the next slide, there are kind of 4 common ways that you could address those risks. You could avoid them. You could say, we're just not going to do that, right? We're not going to pursue any activity that puts us at risk, or maybe like we're not going to schedule conferences in hurricane zones during hurricane season. That's a way just to totally avoid the risk, right? You might decide that we want to mitigate the risk instead of avoid it. So we're going to develop the disaster response plan. Maybe, like with cybersecurity, like you're not going to be able to avoid the risk of cybersecurity, a cybersecurity attack, but we could mitigate that by doing some cybersecurity training. My personal favorite is transfer. I want someone else to be responsible if that risk happens. One of the common ways that you transfer that risk is by buying insurance, right? So I'm going to buy the cybersecurity insurance so that when one of my staff clicks on the phishing email, I am no longer, liable. And I say that in jest, but truly, we have talked to how many CAAs lately who have said that they were a victim of one of those ransomware attacks, and like their insurance is what saved them. Otherwise, they would have been in big, big, big trouble. So you might transfer the risk by, obtaining insurance, using contractors. Maybe you're going to outsource some of the functions. And in some cases, you might just accept the risk, right? Equipment might break. That doesn't mean I'm going to make a plan for what happens if it does. I'm just going to accept it might break, and that might, not be fun, but I'll just buy new equipment, right? I'm not going to create a whole plan for it. So those are some possible risk responses. So for the end of our time together, before we wrap up, I want you to think about, is there a risk that your organization faces? Like, what is one risk that you could think of that you're facing, and how you're going to address that risk? Might you avoid it? Might you mitigate it? Get someone else to be responsible for it? Or just accept that it might happen? And while folks are putting those thoughts in the chat too, or maybe preparing to come off of mute, Anna, I see your comment about you did the risk assessment in one of your senior management team meetings. It was easy to navigate. We loved the save feature. And yeah, you could go back and see if you wanted to research a bit more. So maybe you have a particular risk that you all talked about in that meeting that you might be willing to share, or anyone who's done it recently. So maybe while folks are also getting their thoughts together here, I'm going to start talking about the next slide, but I'm going to leave us on this slide, okay? So sometimes risks are like, I don't know, there's like several things that actually could happen, and those impacts could be severe. Like I could lose a major funding stream, right? Or I could have really major policy change that could impact the way that my organization needs to function, in which case, you might need more information before you can actually build your plan. And that's where you would use what we call scenario planning, where you would identify what are the things that could happen, what's the best, worst, middle case scenario, and then you would build out your different you would actually model, right, what would happen if that funding stream was cut by 25%? What would happen if it was cut by 50%? What would happen if it was totally cut, right? It sounds really freaking scary, and it can be really freaking scary, but it is a really strong practice that can help your organization to be prepared if that thing happens. I just talked to an organization, not a CAA, who one of their major funding streams was disrupted. The contract wasn't renewed or they think it's coming, but it wasn't renewed before the government shutdown. And so that organization had done some scenario planning. And because they had done that planning on October 1, they didn't lay off all of those staff. They moved them into other programs. They kept those staff on board through other positions that they held open intentionally, knowing that this risk might happen. And so, because they had done that good planning, they were able to be very responsive as things rapidly evolved. So Kay said we hold community events and have limited the number we have. Yeah, on those we do have, we are beefing up security and getting more appropriate and getting appropriate insurance. Yeah, I mean that's real too, right? Making sure you have good security, making sure, yeah, that's incredibly important. Yeah, and the insurance piece, my goodness. Whew, I do love insurance. Okay, so I don't see others in the chat just yet, but why don't we move ahead, Terry, and we'll just put up, here's NCAP did build a scenario planning toolkit. So if you'd like to check out some tools and resources that you can use for scenario planning, you can go here and check that out. And Terry, we're actually coming to the end of our time together. So it's a little early. I don't think anyone's going to be upset with us. Please let us know if you are, and we'll stay. But really and truly, we want to check in. Do you have any questions from today? Do you have any comments? Or do you have any requests for tomorrow? Because Terry and I don't need to sleep, and we could totally build a whole new training for tomorrow if you told us you really wanted to talk about something in particular. So, but really, we can build in any specific standards that you want to talk about as well. That is not a heavy lift for us.
We got chocolate, Mary Beth.
Oh, we got chocolate. I love it. And it's calorie free because it's virtual chocolate, which is even better. Yeah, I see, Colleen, you have your hand up.
Hi, I just had a question. I probably already know the answer to it, but so when it comes to the org standards about review of finances at every board meeting or review of programs at every board meeting, if our bylaws are saying we meet 6 times a year minimum, but we're meeting 10 or 11 times a year, we're still held to that standard for every meeting?
If it's a regular board meeting, right? Only when it's a special board meeting do you not have to do that. So like your bylaws might say we meet at least 6 times a year, but our calendar that we built for the year says we're going to meet 10 times. Then
Okay.
those 10 times are regular meetings. But if it's like we're calling a special meeting for an evaluation of the ED, right? That's different. And usually your bylaws have that designation of like how you call a special meeting. It's usually a
Sure.
little different. So it's a good question.
Okay. And then when it comes to review of financials, does it have to be acceptance of the financials every month, or it just needs to be review of?
Every month, let's go back. I want to go look at that language. The governing board has to receive financial reports at each regular board meeting. So it is a receipt, not necessarily an approval, but Terry,
Okay.
help me talk myself out of that tornado if I'm getting myself twisted up. I mean, you'd want, yeah, go ahead.
Receive, it says receive, but I cannot imagine, I have never seen financials presented and not accepted.
Sure. I'm just thinking of there are times based on when some board meetings are and how heavy of a load the finance director has that it's difficult to have them ready by the board meeting. But they go out every month to the board, and if they aren't accepted at one meeting, they're presented and accepted at the following. So does that mean we're out of compliance?
That's a good question. So the way that I would read that standard is they need to have like one, they do need to have the the financials at every regular meeting. So like it should be there for them at that meeting, right?
Okay. Okay.
And then they should, I mean, the other piece that I'm managing in my brain is like your board is a fiduciary, and heaven forbid you should have to call on your officer's insurance because like the board maybe made a decision and it didn't pan out so well and like your organization sustained a loss. How you're going to be able to show that your board fulfilled its duties is via its
Okay.
minutes that showed that they received the report and discussed the finances. I mean, your
Okay.
your D&O insurance is going to be asking about that.
Okay.
And D&O insurance does pay out when, really and truly the board was acting in good faith, but you have to be able to show the board has been having the discussions they need to have for that to work. So,
Okay.
Terry,
Okay.
what would you add?
No, I just was going to add that, that's the protective action, right? That's the best practice. That's what should be done. But in terms of what the standard requires, because we started out saying,
Yeah.
think about what the standard requires, but especially when you come to finance, I don't think compliance is ever enough when it comes to finance. You always, in my experience, want to be striving for best practices. You went on mute, Mary Beth.
Yeah, I'm thinking through that. Yeah, I would say you really want to have those finances at every meeting
Okay.
and have
All right.
time for it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
Love good questions. Okay. Thank you, Kay. We appreciate that. So here's the good news is we get to do this again tomorrow. I won't be here to kick us off, but I hope to join you a little bit later after we do our call with if you haven't seen on the e-news, there's a risk sensitive scenario or risk sensitive planning call tomorrow with Nonprofit Financial Commons and BDO, and that's going to be wonderful. So I'll be here right after that. But Terry will be here, and you're going to get off to a great start. Terry, anything else that you'll add? Want to add?
You guys all get good sleep, eat your Wheaties in the morning, and be gentle with me until Mary Beth gets there.
Okay, Sabrina, anything you want to say as we wrap up?
I just wanted to say thank you to Mary Beth and Terry for all the great information today. You guys had already said it. We will be back here tomorrow, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. So thanks, everyone.
Take care, y'all. See you soon.
See you tomorrow.